I will never be afraid to challenge this illegitimate president. This illegitimate president.
This illegitimate president.
That was New York Attorney General Letitia James, went by Tish James back during the campaign when she was really going hard after Donald Trump and his family, making all sorts of campaign promises that this was going to be the centerpiece of her tenure as the New York Attorney General, kind of the chief law enforcement officer of the state. And so she is making good on that promise. We just learned in recent court filings, we're seeing this here on January 3rd at 11:01 a.m., in the New York Supreme Court, you can see people of the state of New York, Letitia James, petitioner against the Donald Trump organization and many people under the organization. You can see Eric Trump and others. And so the Trump Tower, the representation of the entire Trump organization, there's a special proceeding here brought forward by the people of the state of New York, represented by Letitia James. And so they're really doing this deep dive investigation into Donald Trump. And we've covered a lot of this on the channel. They're going after Donald Trump's CFO, investigating the funding for his grandkids' tuition at some school in New York, and the list goes on and on. A lot of nonsense. But here is Letitia James herself explaining how all of this is working from her office in the form of a civil investigation and a criminal investigation into all of Trump's affairs. And she was explaining this to none other than The View. Here she is.
Question.
Okay.
I can just say, as you know, as has been reported, we have conducted a civil investigation into the Trump organization. We also have a parallel investigation, a criminal investigation. As most of you know, has been publicly reported. We indicted the chief financial officer of the Trump organization and the Trump organization itself. So I have two parallel investigations, one civil, one criminal. And what we are investigating on the civil side is as a result of the testimony of Michael Cohen, the attorney for the Trump organization. And we are looking at whether or not the Trump organization inflated its real estate assets in Westchester County for the purposes of benefiting from insurance and from mortgages. And then the same properties, the very same properties, deflated them for the purposes of evading taxes. That investigation is ongoing, and that's all that I can say.
And that's all that she can say. So we know now that her office is going down two parallel tracks, one civil, one criminal. New York Times helps us flesh this out a little bit further, says that the civil inquiry is regarding whether Donald Trump fraudulently inflated the value of his assets to secure bank loans. Her office, as a result of this inquiry, has subpoenaed a number of documents, part of the Trump organization, Seven Springs Estate, the International Hotel and Tower in Chicago. New York Times says if her lawyers find evidence of wrongdoing, her office can file a lawsuit. As the inquiry is a civil one, Ms. James, though, cannot file criminal charges. It's a give or take. If they're going to be working with the investigative agency, if the Trump individuals, the organization, are cooperating, then they will resolve this with a civil resolution. But they'll only cooperate if they're not going to be indicted. Ms. James's office is also involved in a separate criminal investigation, but that's now being led by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, sworn in on Saturday. Previous DA, Cyrus Vance, who we've talked about a lot here, no longer with the organization. He was there for 3 years, but he left the office at the end of the year. And so we can see here there's a lot of moving parts. We have the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, who's supposed to be a part of a different office, who's leading the criminal charges, whereas Letitia James, as the Attorney General, is leading the civil investigation. And so according to court documents, Letitia James is now adding Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr. here to the inquiry. You can see the Office of the Attorney General has previously advised the court this is going to be ongoing, asking the court to retain jurisdiction. And now we're asking the court to take a look at these new recently issued subpoenas to Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. We can see here the document continues. It says, in fact, we want to go ahead and update the header on the court documents to include Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump. Make sure that they're added to that because the subpoena is going out for them. And this order, this stipulation is agreeing that the Trump parties can do some things. They can file a motion to quash this order, to quash these subpoenas. They can ask the court to stop them from having to come and comply. And we're going to see that they do that. The OIG is then going to respond within 7 days. So the way this is working is these subpoenas have been issued. The Trump team is responding, and they're asking the court to quash the subpoenas. And Letitia James and her office, they're going to respond, and the court is ultimately going to issue a ruling. Now, Trump and his team and the children's team are taking a response, and it sounds like this. Alan Futerfas, he's a lawyer who represents Trump Jr. and Ivanka. He called the Attorney General's actions unprecedented. He argued that the subpoenas circumvent the rights to the grand jury protections that we all have. What does he mean? He's implying that they're trying to use the civil inquiry for a criminal investigation. And grand jury protections stop that from happening. She cannot wear two hats, says another lawyer, Ronald Fischetti. He's also an attorney for Mr. Trump, says the DA can't do this. She cannot wear two hats at the same time. She can't do a civil investigation and a criminal investigation because they're mixing and matching the tools. You can't cross the streams. They warned us about that in Ghostbusters, adding that Miss James had politicized her role as Attorney General. And they talked to another individual, Bruce Green. He's an ethics professor over at Fordham University. He said that, yeah, the Trump family members would still be able to invoke their rights against self-incrimination if, in fact, Miss James's office won the right to question them. Because there is still a constitution in this country. So New York Attorney General Letitia James is demanding that these people come and speak. And Trump and Ivanka have already responded and filed a motion to quash these subpoenas. And Letitia James is not happy about this. She says they're trying to stop my office from interviewing them under oath as part of our investigation into the Trump organization and Mr. Trump. Over 2 years of delay tactics won't stop our investigation, she says, because no one is above the law. Well, let's take a look at the actual motion to quash these subpoenas filed by Trump and the defense team. You can see here, this is their response, filed back and received by the New York courts on 1/3/2022. This is a memorandum of law in support of respondents, moving, and parties. This is Trump, Trump Jr., and Ivanka. This is their motion to quash the subpoenas, or at least to stay the enforcement of those until we resolve these criminal cases. What they're saying here is that Letitia James is doing a civil investigation. The DA's office is doing a criminal investigation. Letitia James is kind of doing a pseudo-investigation of both, as we're going to learn about. And that's inappropriate because we have criminal protections that exist for the protection of constitutional rights in the criminal proceedings that don't apply over in the civil world. So if Letitia James gets to go and use the civil tools, which are much more useful to her office, then she'll be able to get more access to stuff that she may be able to use in criminal proceedings. And so this can be difficult for the defense to defend against if a government entity can use every single tool at their disposal. And so they're saying here, there is a criminal investigation ongoing. Letitia James is trying to get access to documents in a civil investigation, even though she's openly admitting that she and her office are highly interested in investigating Donald Trump and his family criminally. You can see here, we have a preliminary statement from the defense team. They're saying this motion is brought because in an unprecedented and unconstitutional maneuver, Letitia Tish James of New York, she seeks to take depositions of former President Donald Trump's son, daughter Ivanka, as part of an ongoing multi-year investigation into all aspects of Trump's company. This goes on and says that the court need only read the words of the Attorney General herself to see what is going on here. That she is trying to depose Trump over the next month. Why? She said so on The View. We just watched the clip. She says, we've indicted the chief financial officer. And she says, Attorney General Letitia James said on The View, so I have two parallel investigations, one civil, one criminal. We indicted Mr. Weisselberg. I am running these. We were able to connect these two things. The motion says, putting aside whether it was appropriate for any prosecutor, let alone the highest ranking law enforcement official in the state of New York, to go on a talk show like The View to discuss confidential investigations, we'll set that aside. Let's just get down to brass tacks here. The goal of the subpoenas is all too clear. Tish James seeks to circumvent the entire grand jury process and nullify the moving party's constitutional and statutory rights. This maneuver is a violation of the law. The motion continues and says, let's get clear on a statement of facts. Almost immediately after she announced her candidacy in May of 2018, the Attorney General Tish James made several statements on Twitter. You can see a lot of these campaign statements: Exhibit E, Exhibit F, NG, NH, NJ, NI. Here we have an example of one of them. She posted this on October 13th, 2018. TishJames2018.com says, as the next Attorney General, I'll take on, checkmark, Donald Trump. It's a political prosecution. If you elect me, I'm going to prosecute a political opponent. Now, she'll argue this is a criminal prosecution, and everybody on her side of the aisle will hem and haw about this, about what a hero she is. But she is being elected to file a criminal charge to go and prosecute somebody who is a political opponent. She's making it a part of her campaign. She says it all over the place, specifically while campaigning for office and not knowing anything about his businesses, right? Because she's just a candidate. She's not actually in office yet. She's just campaigning. She accused Trump of engaging in public corruption. Well, how does she know about that? Stated in Exhibit F that, quote, she had her eyes on Trump and eyes on Trump Tower. Stated that Trump, quote, should be worried about her and, quote, scared about her upcoming term. And that she wanted to, quote, take on Donald Trump and immediately investigate him and his, quote, cronies. A woman who, up until this point, really, my understanding, has no investigatory powers or inside knowledge about anything that Donald Trump did. Her Twitter rants continued, and she says that they're going to follow the facts wherever they may lead. It appears to have since been removed, but the Attorney General's campaign at one time even contained a section entitled Investigate Trump's New York Business. It's a campaign promise, a review of Trump-related real estate transactions. Okay, that is a review. That's a harassing review. Does she have any suspicion? Why are they reviewing him? It's a political prosecution through and through. You can see on November 2018, she promised to, quote, shine a bright light into every dark corner of Trump's real estate holding. And when she gets elected, she's, quote, definitely going to sue him. And, quote, Trump's going to, quote, know her name personally and threaten to use every area of the law to investigate President Trump and his business transactions and that of his family as well. Said that on the Chris Mills Rodrigo incoming New York AG over at the Hill. And they're going to go after anyone in Trump's orbit. So not saying that I have identified criminal holdings, saying I'm going to actually get elected to go and harass this individual, Donald Trump. Use every tool to investigate and overturn any potential thing that's humanly possible to see if I can justify criminal charges. Okay. The Attorney General's investigation started less than 6 months after being elected, opened a civil investigation into virtually all aspects of the former president's dealings. Scope of the investigation has focused on the valuation of virtually all of Mr. Trump's assets in various statements across all over the place. Subsequent filings show that they are investigating these and numerous other matters. Then, shortly thereafter, July 21, they indicted Alan Weisselberg over at the Trump Organization. It arose from the investigations between the District Attorney's Office of New York and the Office of the Attorney General. These two are supposed to be separated. There's supposed to be a line of division here because the Attorney General is investigating civil this direction and the DANY is investigating criminal this direction. And they're not supposed to be able to use stuff from one investigation in the other. Letitia James wants to do that. She's indicated as much. 6 months later, there's a criminal investigation that's still ongoing. And you can see here, to erase all doubt that they're working in cahoots with one another, well, she went on The View. And this happened very recently, December 14, 2021. It says, we indicted the Trump Organization CFO, Weisselberg. So I have 2 parallel investigations, one civil and one criminal. And we indicted Mr. Weisselberg, the CFO. So they're talking like they are partners in this thing. Trump's lawyers say, given the unambiguous circumstances, a deposition of the moving parties by the OIG is effectively the same thing as a deposition by the criminal division. However, we don't have any constitutional protections afforded every witness through the grand jury process. There's no question that this is a combined investigation and that the OAG has taken credit for indicting Trump companies and its CFO and publicly stated the investigation, the criminal investigation, is ongoing. Even if they were not a joint investigation, there's still procedures that they have to follow. And for these reasons, they say, it's simply indisputable that any testimony obtained to these subpoenas would be immediately available to the very same office. If we go and talk to Letitia James, we know it's going right over to the criminal division, and that is a violation of the Constitution. They say, were there no criminal case, the parties might actually be inclined to testify. We might actually talk. But Letitia James and the DA, they're investigating criminal charges. But there is a criminal investigation into the very same matters at issue here. Attorneys may well instruct witnesses to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights solely because rights under CPL 19040 have been circumvented. An adverse influence under these circumstances would be grossly unfair. Therefore, a stay is warranted. We respectfully request the court quash the subpoenas, and an oral argument is requested. Filed January 3rd, law offices of Alan S. Futerfoss, as well as Fischetti and Mel Gieri. So Letitia James and her office, of course, will be able to respond to this. I'm sure that they will. We'll see if the judge grants oral arguments or whether they're just going to rule on this thing. We'll see if Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump are deposed, and if they are, if they're ordered to sit down and have a conversation, whether they say anything or if they invoke their right to remain silent. We're going to cover this case and more. We know that Letitia James has been on this train for a long time. We'll see if she gets off. We hope you follow along. Would love it if you subscribed and stuck around, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.